Welcome to another episode of Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change, where in my own language, it's all about mapping, discovering, and cross-pollinating the different building blocks towards a planetary civilization ahead. Today's topic is unlocking potential, exploring the gene keys. And why do I think from a planetary civilization perspective, that's of utmost importance? First of all, because I truly think radical change always starts with the individual. And for you as an individual to be able to really on a deep code level to change yourself, ultimately, sure, you need to discard the map that you're given. And I think we will discard that map many times today, like the map of the gene keys. But ultimately, it also often helps you as a human being to have like guardrails within which you can situate yourself in your biographical life phase, your shadows, your potential, to then really unlock the genius that hopefully connects you to your purpose, the strength that wants to live through you and make a contribution in these crucial times. So it's with utmost joy and gratitude, and actually also humility, that we're touching upon this topic, because I could learn so much about my own, let's say, imprint and my own shadows and how I can transform them into gift through this specific model of the gene keys. And today's guest in my podcast is Kristin van Wey, who in my perspective also has a very deep, juicy, butterfly-like biography and so much to share and contribute to help people transform. So like always in my podcast, I'm not introducing the guest myself, but I'm more segueing into asking you, Kristin, the question of how does your biography relate to today's topic? And if there are one or two or three pivotal moments in your biography that help the people listening to the podcast to get an understanding what we're talking about, but also what connected you in your own biography to this topic. So Kristin, the floor is yours. And I'm super curious, out of your rich biography, what are the pivotal moments that connect you to today's podcast? You need to unmute yourself.
That is of utmost importance. Thank you so much. I love so much the way that you introduced me to share about my biography, because so often the first question we ask when we meet somebody is like, what do you do? Who are you? And in context of today's topic, that we are so much more than what we do. It's who we are and who we were designed to be. And so I have a rich biography, just like everybody else does. That richness comes from a life of experiences. And gene keys and human design and all kinds of things, they are a structure, they're a framework that taught me a little bit more about my operating system and how to be more present with the person that I am rather than what I do or my conditioned self. And so, it is a tool that we're going to talk about that is interwoven in my own story. So I didn't find gene keys in human design for my whole life. It's a newer system in the late 80s, but in the early 2000s for gene keys. But I've been around for over 50 years, and I have 7 beautiful children. I have 7 grandchildren now, and that has taught me more about who I am than anything. And so I love my role as a mother and as a wife. I've been married for almost 34 years. And so that's a great deal of the labels that I call myself. But in that, I started out as a massage therapist and a body worker. And I began bumping into energy fields and really took the route of traditional Chinese medicine and more into the Taoism way of health and harmony and balance. And then I fell in love with things like what is actually happening behind the stories. And that took me into energy psychology and the rewriting and working with the mind. And then I even expanded more. And so my expertise and experiences over my lifetime have everything to do with this holistic view of access points that take us into really that one question that matters, which is, who am I? And why am I actually here? And what do I want to express? So that's just a tiny bit about me, Alistair. So how else can I share some of the stories?
Yeah, I think when I tie that back to my own biography, I was always curious to explore, let's call them, mapping the territory of personal development, of consciousness, of meditation. In that, I think our biographies are like pretty much interwoven with a lot of the background you're bringing. When you were sketching these different, let's call them templates or pathways, you were sketching two pretty prominent ones. One is called human design, which we won't further explore today, but also the gene keys. So I think since there's so many templates out there, I think it would help the listener to better understand, like, okay, what came first and what's the difference, and why are you working with rather the gene keys than the human design?
I think they all are relevant for different reasons. And so I think it depends on where somebody is in their life and where what's unfolding. And we are always going to be inspired when we have the ears to hear, when we're present, the language that we can hear in. When I found Gene Keys, I had already been, I had, 30 years of this type of health and holistic practitionerhood. And so we can know something in our mind, but we can even teach it and be really successful at it and actually not have embodiment in it. And I think we pursue the things that we want to learn because it is in our genius. So when I was exposed to human design and gene keys, I simply wasn't looking. In fact, I said, no more systems. If I'm going to be taught, it's going to come from the inside out from now on. Like, I'm done with trying to learn from somebody else. So when somebody came to me and said, I just want to show, can I just look up your chart? And I was like, no, I'm done. And she asked me for some time, and finally I was like, fine, here's my birth information, because it is based off of part of it. There's esoteric and exoteric parts of human design, which then feeds into gene keys. But she asked me for my birth information and I gave it to her. And the first time that she pulled up that human design chart, it was as if I was looking at myself as a whole person. I don't want to say for the first time in my life, but I saw reflected back in me because of the history. And I know that the energy systems and chakras. And so I looked at it and it was very familiar. And I started playing around with strategy and authority and getting to know my operating system, which was life altering, because I knew a lot of things, but I didn't know which things were the most important things to focus on. And so as I'm on this deeper discovery of who I am through many, many ways, I then saw gene keys. And the gene keys put it all into perspective for me, because we're all in different places of that map, right? And we get to lean into that. But oh my goodness, gene keys gave a pathway that I was able to then use with my clients in a very new way, that it wasn't just about me. And that's what I like with energy work and my private client work in the past. It was more about my intuition and my reading, fingerprint analysis, but there was a lot of reader's choice in that. I wanted to empower my clients to be able to know what they were looking at, and then have the clarity and the ability to navigate the map. And I could guide them, but I wanted them to be empowered in that. And so this just gave me the perfect framework. So it's not actually a system, but it is an access that we have to use, as you were saying earlier, as guardrails to be able to help people navigate those areas of life. And so Gene Keys has the hologenetic profile, which has 3 different distinct areas that cover your physical body, your emotions, and the mental. That also goes into your life work. In that first activation sequence, you've got your life work and your groundedness that comes through being deeply rooted into your purpose, and the discovery of the unconscious and the conscious mind, and the combination of right and left hemispheres, and so much wrapped up into there. And that we kind of move up through the Venus sequence, and that was teaching me about my core wounds. I was well aware of what my core wounds were, and I kept bumping into them throughout my life, but I didn't understand that through the wounding was actually the genius. And so I began to have a lot more clarity, very specifically in areas of my core wounding, and then how that impacts my work and my business and what I'm here to do. So my core wounding became core healing, which then became vocation and what I'm here to do and how I'm here to serve within my target market. So it became a very powerful tool. And so while I do overlap both of them, I feel like Gene Keys gives a very clear map for people to follow. We don't have to be intellectual geniuses to magnify the genius that each one of us has. And there's all kinds of genius, and that gives us access to our own profile and what that means to us, not only in the larger scheme, but also in our day-to-day life and being present in the now.
Yeah, I want to tie that back with my own discovery of the Gene Keys. So I got on my 40th birthday, one of my mentors, also a woman, working not in a too dissimilar field than you, asked me if I wanted my profile and her interpretation. And she asked me for a very specific question. And before my birthday, like before we had the meeting around my 40th birthday. And she asked me something along the lines like, okay, what do you think you have already accomplished? Like meaning the learnings in your own biography that you subjectively as Alistair feel you have covered some ground. And what are the things you still want to work through and activate and bring into 3D reality? And then we did like this profile, and we recorded the whole session that I still every couple of months, maybe every 3 to 6 months, look through. And then I met you. And what I found very striking is at the same time, the precision of the map, like kind of the innate blueprint, some of it like activated, some more dormant, and the different sequences. So I think it will help teach or have the listeners understand more of the Gene Keys if we start really like working on the case. And I don't mind, we could take you, we can take my profile, like I'm an open book. It's not that I will like give everybody my birth chart and map my human like my Gene Keys, but what I found very interesting is this triple split, right? So instead of me explaining that, what does that actually mean, I want to like paraphrase it, and then I'm curious of how you interpret what I'm saying. So throughout my life, not only me myself, but like my parents, my siblings, my close friends, my partners often perceived me, especially in my younger years, really somewhat split inside. I sometimes really had the feeling, okay, my head, like my mental realm, is going into one direction, whereas like my emotional is somewhere completely different. And then again, my physical embodied sense of self is also somewhere different. And it really took me a long and arduous journey, to align those three, let's say, nervous centers. So I'm curious if you could explain that through our encounter as Alistair, but then also abstract, what does triple split mean, and what do people with a triple split chart, especially have to work through?
So for anybody who would be brand new to human design or Gene Keys, this is a human design principle. And we have different operating systems. There's centers in the human design. Each of us have 9 of them. Some of us have a single, I am a single definition, which means that anything that's defined, any gifts that I'm here to give to the world, the energy that I have consistent availability to me is connected all in one single line. Everything's talking to each other. So you could think of that like a computer. And then there is a split. you might have, if you imagine the chakra systems, I know most of our people are going to be listening to this, but just imagine the traditional chakra systems, but there's 2 extra ones, and these are centers, and they have similar roles, not exactly. But imagine that you have 2 up at the, maybe your ajna and your crown are talking. So your head and ajna are talking, but then you have your root center and maybe your spleen talking. And there's this big gap in between. And so that's what we're calling a split. If you have a triple split like you do, Alistair, you're going to have actually 3 biocomputers or 3 centers with a universe of information and all kinds of shadows and gifts and aspects of love within it. You have 3 that are talking distinctly to themselves. So there's a triple split. There's also a quadruple split. And so, and then there's also one called a reflector that doesn't actually have any channels. There's nothing talking to each other. It's all absorptive. And so for you, I think one of the most important discoveries that you and I talked about was in understanding your operating system. What makes you you, and how do we individually and also in relationship honor the operating system of another person? And so as we think about human design, we think about what we call the not self or the conditioned self. And the conditioned self are those areas that it's nature versus nurture, really, right? We have the genetic part and what we came with, but then we have this part of us that is learned behavior, and it's not actually who we are, but it might be expected behavior based off of our family and our culture and all of these different things in the nurture side of how we are raised. And so the whole goal and my purpose would be in helping people to know, to be able to say, I know who I am. Here is my operating system, because pain, dysfunction, frustration, physical health, mental issues, all of these things come when we step outside of our natural operating system, because your DNA has an ideal function, the way that it's going to have outputs. And so when we meet people with a triple split, oftentimes that's not as common. It's expected that people behave in certain ways or function in certain ways and think in certain ways. And so I love when I find a triple or quadruple split to work with, because that's one of the main things that completely changes their life, is to know that, oh, what I was told is hyperactivity or lack of focus or lack of presence is actually my genius. And so you start removing what you're not and living who you are. And so a triple split has, imagine that you have 3 computers open, this biocomputer that fully operates different aspects of yourself. And now all of a sudden you go like, I have a mind of like the HAL computer. I'm doing things, I can do these. But there's also some really interesting and special things that you need to learn about that type of operating system, as well as how you communicate to other people about the way that you communicate. So it's going to be important for you to have a communication skill set, which is something we can all learn. So that if, for example, you have your authority, the best way for you to make decisions in your system, you're going to want to make sure that you are running it by all 3 of these computers. You're going to want to honor however you make decisions, we call it the authority. You're going to want to be running that by your computer. So you are an emotional decision maker. You need to make sure that all 3 of these computers are on board before you make decisions. So I think that can be some of the most profound information, is to give people confidence and actually bring them back into themselves and get out of their head, because we don't make decisions with our head anyway, but we process information here, but ultimately learning to follow your strategy and authority along with your definition is extremely powerful. So how did that feel being in your body to understand that you have these 3 computers? How did that feel to you?
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to tie into what you just shared, and trying to give the people a felt recognition of a triple split. So literally just in the few months that we know each other, I mean, it's kind of half a year, a little bit less than half a year we know each other, that I'm like diving deeper with the Gene Keys. What I found very interesting, instead of complaining like inside of myself when like basically my head, my emotions, and my body go sideways or work in parallel, instead I can basically say it's very interesting. I have like 3 due diligence systems, because often, you know, I think when I was younger, especially, like kind of, we're really talking whatever in my teens or so, I was really just confused because my head was telling me one thing, whereas my heart or my emotions were telling me a different thing. And again, my body, my gut were telling me a different thing. And what I now do, even though before knowing you, but now I have a more concise map for myself of taking decisions. Usually my head is actually a pretty simple thing. It's like I do my due diligence and then know, okay, left or right. With the emotions, it's not quite that simple, because emotions can seemingly exist in parallel, or they're like contradictory, or you're very attracted by something, which is a huge opportunity, but then also because necessarily by definition, if it's a big opportunity, it's also often sometimes scary, right? Because if it were not to be scary, it could not be an opportunity. So to weigh that then in my emotional system, and then ultimately in my like gut or hara, you know, to really, I have the feeling once, when you were giving me this very first exercise of like, you know, like try to imagine these like 3 different spheres of decision making and aligning them into like one sphere. And that has helped me really tremendously, because I don't think I can work against my operating system. Most likely I will always have these nerve centers kind of doing work, processing information kind of in parallel. But once I know I can align them, then there's a deep felt, like almost like a triple confirmation, maybe just to stay in the language or the framework, like I can like I have multiple reference systems. I think that's how I would like bind it up for the triple split. I want to segue into this 64 almost like magic numbers of the genetic profiles that we're born with. And I want to especially circle around the 1 and the 2, the 63 and the 64, because I know only in this few months I've learned so much about myself. And it's a pretty unusual podcast because I share so much about myself and it's very dialogical. But I really think, before I ask you what helps, is I always felt I want to move big things on the outside. Like everybody that knows the podcast, like a planetary civilization, ultra large scale infrastructure change, big investment, like big portfolio projects. But I also, since very early, like childhood, earliest childhood on, I had a deep mystic, right? Who was interested in church, the altar boy, going to monasteries, vipassana, shamanism, all of that. I find that very interesting, because in my profile of the gene keys, that's like literally just complementary pairs. And then another one, which I find really striking, is a strong feminine, but also a strong masculine polarity. So I want you to explain the people, first of all, why 64? Where does that come from? Like, by what is that infused into that syncretic model of the gene keys? As well as then, since we now know each other quite a bit, right? What does the 1 and the 2, the 63 and the 64, specifically in my case, have to do with each other? What may be challenges with that, but also the genius, you know, of knowing that and working around that?
Yeah, great question. Alistair, thank you for being so open with your own life, because I think it does demonstrate and help other people to look inside themselves. So everybody's going to have different numbers. Your numbers on your chart are very unique to you. And there may be other people, but less and less people will have the exact same. So to go back into the history of this, of where this came from, is the 64 gene keys come from the I Ching. And the I Ching is between 4,000 and 5,000 years old. It is the predecessor of the yin and the yang and the 5 element theories. And a lot of years of very wise people feeding into this system. So each of those 64 have our greatest fears of humanity built into them, as well as our greatest aspects of love. And each of us have these very specific genetic coordinates that we are predisposed to express. Now, we know through epigenetics and all of this rising field the last 30, 40 years that we can turn on and off genes. And so what was really interesting with human design and then also Gene Keys that was born out of this system that has a foundation in it that took it a completely different direction is that we can now map based off of your genetic codons. You can map out that each one of those gene keys has a genetic component to it. And so are we operating out of a shadow state, out of fear, or are we operating out of an expansive state of love? And that's the question, and that's also the opportunity. So in your particular case, you happen to have what we call programming partners. Each of these 64 has a very specific partner. So when we look at this first graphic of anybody's hologenetic profile, it's called the activation sequence. When we're looking at that, your life work, evolution, radiance, and then your purpose, you have these programming partners. Your first two are gene key. You're at the very end of the spectrum. You're ready. You've got your 63 and your 64. So that's like the bookends at the end of all 64. But you also have in your chart the 1 and the 2. And the 1 and the 2 are really powerful because they're the master. I don't know if you want to call them master, but they are the master yang and yin, that first original yin and yang where everything else. So if you saw a chart, it's very interesting. You see like gene key 1 and gene key 2, and then it kind of gives birth to this chart where you begin to see 3 and then the 4 and then the 5 and the 6, and you see them all coming out into this universal creation of life. And you basically have the divine feminine and masculine, and you also have the very end of the genetic codons. So I think it's a very, very interesting experience to be in your body as you learn to really be that expression, right? That's like we're living in an epoch right now. We're at the end of a season. And so there's a lot of fresh beginnings and creativity that come from that. And then there's also the saying goodbye and the endings that happen at the end of phases of humanity. And also the beautiful thing is it's holographic. So everything we have individually is also represented exponentially. And so you have a unique way of being able to express both sides of our genetic patterns as humans. And again, learning how your operating system works is going to determine how you turn on and off those genes. Are you operating from shadow? Are you operating from a lack of awareness? Are you operating from presence and pause and breath and movement, right? So I think it's a beautiful, and then you add your triple split in there and you add the way that you need to learn to ride your emotional waves to make decisions and honor. It's like dipping your toe into every aspect of your feelings before you come to clarity. And having all the computers on board at the same time. It's a really interesting operating system that you've been in, Alistair. And so I love that you're really getting clarity on it.
Well, I want to unpack that, and because it's a complex system, but at the same time very elegant and very precise. So I think using me as a guinea pig in this specific podcast, I don't know if I ever recorded a podcast where I'm so much the guinea pig, but so what I find really interesting is I want to start with this riding the waves of my emotions. So what I find very interesting is even in my nowadays, as Alistair is turning 45 soon, I have a pretty high amplitude of feelings, right? I think I'm at least in a month, if not twice a month or so, I can be in this Superman saving the planet, huge projects, but also being overwhelmed and having the feeling I need to hide in a cave. So instead of fighting these emotional waves, especially in therapy, somatic experiencing, what I learned is the less I fight my own emotional waves and give them a moment to express themselves, because when I give them the room, all waves usually go down to a baseline. So I think that's my first takeaway. The other one, which I find like specifically like written into the code of my gene keys, is this paradox of making this human experience where I often have the feeling, okay, wait, sweetheart, actually, I could comfortably sit in a monastery or, just like be invisible. But at the same time, that's the odd thing, because I'm a very extrovert and very active person. I really want to show up. I really want to shape the world according to my values and help birth the new earth, the new paradigm, whatever we want to call it. And again, here, instead of fighting these complementary pairs, right, just really accepting, okay, there seems to be a shadow side of Alistair, especially when he was younger, of spiritually bypassing the complexity of human life, right? Like just sitting again doing a course, again visiting an enlightened teacher, again going to satsang, which is basically a dialogue, a setting where you sit in front of a realized master, whatever realization means. More on that in other podcasts. But instead of that, more really sensing inside of myself and really being very honest and saying, hey, if I'm really honest, deep down at the core of who I am, I'm a mystic, right? It's like, I don't know. And the older that I am is, I don't know. I'm just trying to do my best given that human experience. So I think that's one of the polarities. And the other one, which I find very interesting, is although I'm born masculine, like in a male body, and I'm not transgender or transsexual, is it took me at the least up until my 30s to discover within side of myself a healthy masculine, like just an expression. What do I want as a guy? Like what type of relationship or money or career or turnover do I really want to create? Because I have such a flowy, intuitive, feely side that I often merge with my environment. And again, here, just to wrap that up for the people listening, it took me a long way to really just integrate that and say, hey, wait, actually, I have a very strong feminine side. It's like everything that I could coin, like my ballet career, all my mentors having been like all female mentors up until this day. Still waiting for a masculine mentor to show up. If a masculine mentor listens to that and says, let's grab Alistair by the balls, okay, but warmly welcome. Drop me an email. But also here, instead of fighting the masculine or fighting the feminine, integrating that like complementary pairs inside of my operating system. I wonder, is there more to the 1 and the 2, the 63 and the 64 to say, so that the listeners can get a first, at least high level sketch of the system we're trying to run through here?
Yes, of course. I do want to, if it's okay, I'd like to unpack a little bit of what you said. And you said a lot. There was a lot in there, but I think for anybody listening also is this operating system that's unique to Alistair is going to be unique to you as well. And when we're talking about an emotional wave, it's one of the ways that we call an authority, that we do make decisions. How many times are we shamed or shut down as children when we express emotions? When is it ever appropriate for us to express how we feel? And so those first 6, 7 years of life, even up till 2 years old, but from 2 to 6, 7, as brain waves are beginning to formulate into more regular patterns, we go from being an absolute sponge to being on autopilot. So, if you think of those old timey play and record tape recorders, we're on we're on record mode, and then all of a sudden we kind of click the just play mode. And so I feel like the conditioning we were talking about earlier is coming from not being able or not being understood and able to express, in your case, these emotions, and then having a very unique processing system. So as adults, at least I would say in most countries that I've ever visited, there's really strict guidelines around what's appropriate to express and to have maturity in those expressions. And so as an adult, every adult client that I've ever met has deep emotions. We all do as human beings, right? But we haven't learned to regulate them very well. And so the beauty of knowing that you have an emotional wave is that these waves are there to, it's like, imagine it's all information. And if we try to make a decision, or we try to lead in life and move forward in life without gaining enough information, then it's going to be hard to make a proper decision. So I'm imagining when you are having a wave and you're feeling emotions, if you were taught not to feel, and most people suppress their emotions or they set them aside, I'll deal with that later. And you mentioned the word exhausted or frustrated, or these words that we feel when we're overwhelmed. And the overwhelm comes when we, one, get outside of our design. We're trying to use our life force energy through channels and pathways that don't belong to us, that are conditioned. So it just doesn't feel well. And the genetics are, they're like, nah, it's not working for me. And so we're going to have this restriction that comes in our system when we're not listening to our operating system. We truly are passengers inside of this earth suit that we have. And so the genetics are always going to come out on top in this race. And so we have to learn how to be in flow with our genetics. And so I think it's really beautiful, as you shared, that you give yourself permission to feel those emotions. And if we give ourselves permission to feel the emotions at whatever depth that those go, high or low, we feel them, but we have a skill set to know that it's a wave and that we ride that wave and that we can be present with it, because at every aspect of the wave, we're picking up different information. We're dipping our toe into how it feels here, and what would it feel here? Am I going to go into this business deal, this relationship, whatever it is you're doing? You're getting a feel of the whole spectrum. So by the time you've gone up and down the wave, then your system has enough information gathered that you can safely say this is a full yes, or it's a full no, or it's a not yet. And the challenge with emotional wave is that it can take as long as it takes. And that's not on somebody else's time frame. So as children or in a relationship, somebody wants you to be all snappy and make that decision, and you're in the middle of a wave and you're like, and then you make a decision and then you regret it, because you're in the generator, manifesting you're a generator. And so you need to have a full battery when you say yes, in order for you to be able to fulfill your responsibilities and obligations. And so I think that allowing the process, but having confidence and a skill set to know that this is a wave and that you're gaining information, you're going to be looking at it not from a state of overwhelm and frustration, but of curiosity. And that changes everything.
I think you mentioned a terminology. That's the next one that I would like to unpack. So you said you're a manifesting generator, which I know for a while now, because one of my mentors has worked with the gene keys, and before that with human design for quite a while with me. So it feels more like diving deeper with something that, for whatever reason, because I think I mainly encountered it in a deep shamanic life phase, and I was more interested in like all the other podcast episodes, like drinking ayahuasca and stuff like that. So, and currently I'm really trying to come to grips with like, what is the stuff that I think I've already worked through? What is the still dormant potential that I can unlock through, the system of the gene keys? And for people to understand more of the guy behind the podcast, like Alistair, what different typologies within the gene keys exist, and what makes a manifesting generator, because there's other typologies. And for me, describing the manifesting generator feels almost like describing like kind of like how my core engine, my core energy system, my core pranic vessel, you said like earth suit, how that works energetically. So I'm curious, how would you explain people what a manifesting generator is and what other typologies exist out there?
Okay, so just so we're clear, we're really interchanging a lot of gene keys and human design terminology. So I don't know if that's confusing to people, because manifesting generators are going to come back to human design. Gene keys gives this hologenetic profile. Human design uses the astrological signs to determine the placement of these 64 things. And gene keys takes a very specific astrological pathway, like your conscious sun, your conscious earth, your unconscious sun, your unconscious earth, these programming partners. So I know it's a lot of deepness. So it's unfortunate we're not sharing screens and people can actually see, but we could do that, on something different. But the point is, manifesting generators come from human design, and we have manifestors, generators, a hybrid of manifestors and generators equaling a manifesting generator. We have projectors, and then we have reflectors. And each one of these designs are really an operating system in and of them. It's like a filtering operating system. So for example, a manifestor is designed to just make a decision and go, right? They're here as manifestors. They manifest things. They design the cars. They're very visionary. Not that the rest of us aren't also, but that's their job. Yeah. In other eras, they might have been the kings and the priests and the queens and the priestesses in life. They were there to just go and initiate things. They're the initiators of the designs. And then the generators are the motors behind everything. And so they have the energy consistently in the energy centers so that they can operate and move energy. And so they get things done in the world. They go get things done. Manifesting generators have that piece that we can initiate, but then we also have the motor to sustain it. So think of like a manifestor would be like a cheetah. They can go do it, but then they need a nap. They can run really, really fast. And then, hey, I need a pause. Manifesting generators can initiate, and then they can keep going. And that's very cool. Where the generators aren't necessarily they're not there to initiate, but they are there to keep things going. And then our projectors are the wise ones, the advisors, the counselors. They're there to absorb the information and to guide people. They get their greatest joy from magnifying the energy of other people, because they don't have the energy centers like our generators do. So, and the manifestor, same thing. They don't have the motors to keep going, so they rely on the generators. And then, of course, you have the reflectors, which aren't a type in that context at all. They're there to be like, they observe. Their very, very presence activates this pure expansion in other people, good or challenging. So being a manifesting generator for you means that you have a lot of energy and a lot of ideas.
Exactly. A lot of energy and a lot of ideas. So what I find very striking is I never had a lack of energy and I never had a lack of ideas. But I need clear guardrails, and knowing my operating system, especially coming back to the triple split, where let's say my mental operating system, my emotional operating system, and my physical operating system, when they don't align, they can go completely sideways, and hence things go haywire. I think that's enough. I'm curious if it would help the listeners, before we go more into practical applications, what can you learn for like relationships, romantic relationships, team building and stuff like that? Is there something in my sequence, in this like pearl sequence, that you think makes sense to elaborate on, so other people that are maybe new to the topic of gene keys can learn from that? And I can't cut out the dogs. I'm really sorry.
Okay, so you talked about relationships, and you talked more about vocational type things. And so those are two different areas of the chart. As we mentioned before, the first part is really gaining, becoming your own soulmate. It's becoming the right and the left hemisphere, becoming your own soulmate, understanding your operating system to the point where the energy that you have so much of, and that all of the ideas that you have so many of, go into the channels that they were designed. Because you might have 1,000 ideas, but which of those ideas are coming from, you know, like inspired inner work, right? So what is conditioned ideas versus not, totally different topic. But if we're talking about getting into alignment with who you are and the way that you're using your energy, then you're going to have far less frustration and confusion, which we didn't go back to the names and the things under 64 and 63 and 1 and 2. But when you look at your chart, confusion is in your life work. So your default in probably the first area of your life when things happen, like how the world sees you, the tip of the iceberg is going to, when you're frustrated and operating out of shadow or fear, you're going to feel confusion, and you're also going to feel doubt. And so that's where the shadows are at work. So when you're talking about relationship, it's a hologram. Every single one of these gene keys that I can see in your hologenetic profile, when one of the shadows goes, kind of you're in a bandwidth where all the shadows go. So like when you're talking about your work, or you're talking about a relationship or your health, you're going to trigger them. So start anywhere. And like when you feel confused, how do we shift that into imagination? How does that become illumination, which are the shadow, the gift, and the siddhi of that gene key for you? And so I find that when an individual is willing to go into themselves and understand the triggers and the shadow patterns, that it begins to open us up to transforming, or the transmutative process. And then we begin to have a little more clarity, and then we start running the energy in the pathway. So if I look and I go, okay, well, Alistair, his main focus as a line 6 is to be a teacher here on this planet, whatever that teacher means to you, to express, you know, whether that's in your esoteric side or in your other side, because you have a lot of roles that you play. But you're here to be a teacher, and you're here to be an example of, or give embodiment to, imagination and illumination on the planet. So that gives you, so all these ideas that you're having, and I'm really simplifying all this for this context, but imagine that you are here in your life work to use your imagination to open up the illumination of whatever it is you're doing or who you're teaching. And then if I come to some of your other spheres, it would be like your 63 is inquiry and truth. So when you feel doubt, if you pause into the doubt, into the scary part, that in the pain sometimes that we feel in doubt, and that can be little teeny things, or it can be a massive wave of things. But if we lean in, looking with curiosity and knowing that there's a light in there, the doubt turns into inspiration of inquiry. Through the inquiry, that becomes truth. And that triggers then imagination and illumination. And so if you want to ask me some more questions around that, but
I actually think it's a very interesting one, and I think then we can segue more into like couples dynamics, team dynamics, your work, actually also like what you're offering, and how that's infused or inspired by the gene keys. I think especially when I look into the connection in between 63 and 64, I had a really deep embodied felt of gratitude, actually, that basically when I look at the baseline of my life, like basically when I was a young child and literally just super confused, right? Like, okay, the state of the planet at large, I grew up in an activist family. We're building nuclear weapons, like environmental destruction, women's rights, the North and South, like the pre-colonial system that's still dictating for most human beings a really abominable life. I was really just confused. But what's interesting, as the now Alistair, I can basically say, wait, actually is very interesting, because the confusion, led to me imagining, dreaming, reading copious amounts, like thousands, 10,000s of books, and really imagining how could life on planet Earth as Earthlings in these Earth suits look like in a couple of generations when we work collectively through our shadows. So I think that's a beautiful example from my own, let's say, evolution. And then the other thing, basically the same, when I truly doubt, not in a bad sense, more in the sense of like how you would approach like a complex strategical question for a client or a think tank or an impact investor, then actually the doubt is kind of almost the sparkle for a deep inquiry. And I don't know if I like so much the word truth in a let's say ontological sense, more in a, let's say, epistemological sense, maybe, is that truth comes when I've weighed all of the options and I did deep desk research and I've been preparing for months, and then I write a proposal for a client as an agent, as a consultant, or as a more type companion, mentor, shaman. We've been exploring all the doubts, we've been inquiring into all the possibilities, and now there's some pathways to really transform that into a new potential. So I think enough of Alistair, maybe, for today's podcast. And I think I've shared more than in any other podcast. I'm curious, in your own work, especially with couples, teams dynamics, because you also work as an advisor and as a coach. So you also have a very broad spectrum of how you share your gifts with other human beings. Where is that most infused by, and where do you specifically use the gene keys?
I have a really wide, a really broad, my niche market isn't as niched maybe as a lot of people, but it comes down to, I tend to attract people who have tried everything else. I've just had a very rich experience with everything from suicide all the way through birth, all the way through the death process. And because of my other talents, my other gifts, or like my gene keys, I was born where the veil was very thin to me. And so I've had 3 near-death experiences. I've had so many experiences through that is infused in my perspective outside of everything else. So I tend to understand the life-death process. I see myself almost as a small a avatar, and that I have experience with all of the elements, and they're all in my gene keys. Like if you look at the prime gene keys, there's these very specific elements, and I have 4 of them. I have fire and water, and I have the wind, and I have fire, water, wind, and I have that earth in me. And so it's like, to be able to go over the course of my lifetime having experiences in each of these elements, if we want to call it that, gives me the perspective to help with people in very dire situations. I even founded a nonprofit working in crisis communities with trafficking and poverty and abuse and that type of thing, because when you go below, you can go above, right? And so when you say, like, what is the most, like maybe the demographic, I don't know that I have one, except for it's the people who really are at a crossroads or in pivotal moments of that really need to go deep with deeper trauma or deeper health concerns and the deeper aspects of life. And so I've seen this tool bring, as far as relationships go in marriages, I've done a lot of couple work. I work with couples as they understand their own and then each other's operating systems. And I love to do that. I curate the experience for people. I love to do 3 to 5 days retreats with couples or even with families, We love individual sessions online, but to be together or to commit to a longer space where you really walk the walk with somebody and to really get into their sacred space. I take this role really, really with humility and with honor of everyone. I can't look at anybody now without seeing who they actually are. And it causes a great deal of compassion for myself and other people to know that these shadows are actually the catalyst of evolution. We need the shadows. They will never go away. And I think sometimes we have this perception that maybe someday when I arrive, I'm going to just feel bliss all the time. And I'm wondering if we could feel the bliss and feel the joy and feel the love at the same time as we're going through really hard things. And I can say, yes, it's very possible. So Richard Rudd has this little pathway that he created, and all of these things we're feeling, whether it's in couples, relationships, working with corporations, working with clarity around what is my path? What is my purpose? A lot of people are doing things because they just are doing them. It's not something they're super passionate about. It's money, it's a job. But if we help people to work through their core shadows and their conditioning, then they start to align, and the natural, pure expression coming out of them is going to be who they actually are. And that's going to bring magnificent resources, is going to bring magnificent joy, and your relationships in understanding you will help your partner and your children, because now you're looking at them with curiosity, you're looking at them with honor. Like, you're not stepping on people when they're down. Somebody's really going through their emotional wave and you're like giving them a hard time because they're down here. You're like, get over it, come on, trying to rush the process. And so like we get into this honor system. And so yeah, I mean, I could tell you some specific examples, but before I do that, I just want to share like what Richard Rudd said. Is he's got this understanding where everything, like our shadows in this wave, it goes in a circle starts with dissonance. And through the dissonance, that's what you were talking about, your shadow. You're like, well, because of the confusion, if I sat in that for a minute and I let my emotions and my wave and I felt that presence of whatever was going on and honored it, then the imagination can start to break through. And the same thing is that dissonance leads to feedback. It might not be good feedback. You might hate the feedback you get with your partner because they don't like how you're behaving, or they love it and you get good feedback. Kids, I've raised 7. And so I know that there's this feedback mechanism happens with our children very quickly and very rapidly, and same with my partner. But the dissonance goes to feedback. And then if you choose, you will assimilate that feedback. So there's assimilation feedback that happens. And then assimilate that in a way that's conscious or unconscious, it's happening. And then that leads to more authentic sharing of who you are. And then that turns into distillation. And what you see, that's more of the distillation is an integrated space. Like, okay, here's my shadow and here's my gift, and they're coming together, which is what I heard you say earlier in the call. And then the final thing you said, which is why I brought this up, is gratitude. When you can see gratitude and experience an embodied state or a distilled state, even when things are hard. So you may be having dissonance, but you're still in states of real-time distillation, real-time embodiment that then brings a sense of gratitude. That's when the energy starts moving in directions that are going to heal this planet and going to heal our homes and our relationships, because people are present and they are deeply committed and loyal to this process for themselves, but also each other.
I wonder, at that moment in the podcast, are there some case studies and best practice examples, like obviously anonymous, that you feel like sharing? Again, specifically asking for those examples where Gene Keys as an intervention or a template or as a guardrail, like really has led through a breakthrough. Really curious and listening into that.
I have so many of those stories, Alistair, like so many sacred ones. And obviously, here's the interesting thing. We all came to experience different things. I work with a lot of people who have been, who called in for whatever reason that one believes, really challenging circumstances. And some of that comes from genetics and the nurturing or the nature side. And some of it comes from, you know, whether that's health challenges people are born with, or there's just different things on that spectrum. And so as I'm sharing some of these, I don't want to overlook that each person's journey is sacred to them. And everybody's shadow feels like the worst thing in the planet to you. Your shadow, I might be like, what's the big deal? Like, that's not a big deal, right? Because I don't have a bunch of circuitry running through that shadow in the same way you do. And so, I wanted to share that because oftentimes you're like, here's the drama stories and here's the miracles. And sometimes we forget that just the daily life is the miracle, and navigating the little things like washing the dishes and getting on your computer to do your job are sometimes as important and as profound as maybe an example I might share today. But like I said, I work with very challenging circumstances, and one was so profound in the speed at which they were able to shift. And that was being in a state where they were suicidal in that moment, and being able, and again, I have other talents to be able to get people to be able to hear, but I know this sounds weird, but I really appreciate the deeper traumas because people are raw and they're wide open, and they're willing to go into the depth because they're so far in it that they don't know how to get out. And so if you have a practitioner or a facilitator that knows how to meet you in that, in confidence, and also just honor where you are without trying to fix something or change something, but just to go in with you and let you be present to, and create some space and some breath in there so that people can see condensed stuff, so condensed you can't even see it's in your head. And you know, so I can bring people into a state. So if I was working with a client, and I was in this space where I'm looking at their gene keys and I'm asking, using the right words to guide them down in through the shadows, because where they were in a suicidal state was they couldn't see any of the light within it. They couldn't transform it themselves. They felt so overwhelmed. And I was able to use that space with the right words of being able to help them articulate how they were experiencing it, and then go in and actually, like I won't use theirs, but like yours is confusion, imagination, illumination, is we could go deeply into the confusion and show them where the patterns were. And they were able to, just by having a little bit of clarity, because again, I don't know how this all operates on a genetic level. Like, I'm not inside my DNA going, turn on, turn off, you know. But what happens is, in certain moments of our life, there's like this built-in immune system. And when help is there or the system is ready, those things are spontaneous. And this was such a spontaneous reaction for this person to be able to see that they, all of the things that were weighing, all this suppressed stuff that was just weighing so heavily that they couldn't see a way out, that they just wanted to exit the planet, they were able to connect the dots in a way that made sense to them, that embodied them. That dissonance went all the way up to gratitude within an hour. And it was just, now, did we go through everything, every sphere, every part of their gene key? Not at all. What we did is we gave them access through the portal in one of those spheres that was already encoded in their DNA. So their system was like, oh, somebody's talking about it, right? Like, we're putting awareness on it, and then giving them access to their own genius, and then giving them the confidence that there is a part that transcends your pain, and what aspect of you is in pain. And so I taught them kind of what I shared with you. These, we'll call it, for you use the hara, so we'll go with that, kind of those systems. The Dantians, well, let's call it in the Dantians, right? So the Taoist, you have these three. You have an upper, a middle at the heart, and a lower Dantian in that gut area. And bringing them from the level of the head in the shadow state down into the heart, and a softening, and then down into a co-creative space with them, with their higher self, and what they considered the divine. it was like, it was so incredible. And I didn't have to do anything but just help them see where, like you're calling it guardrails, but just kind of help them see where to put their attention and their energy. And that was so sacred to me, so very sacred. And I've had experiences where a lot of people come to me because of their children. Maybe their children has a serious health issue or a mental health issue. And I always really enjoy working with the parents rather than depending on the age of the child. And so I've had some really cool experiences where working with a parent who then had the skill set of communication and presence to be able to go down the emotional ladder with somebody, to be able to ask the right questions, look at their child from the filter of their child. Let's imagine that there was an emotional wave that they were totally out of control and this child was getting in trouble all the time, to then giving the tools to the parent to help the child, so that the conditioning, we're not working on conditioning in their 30s or 40s or 50s. We're in real time giving tools to parents to know how to do that, and also with their partners. So I've helped a lot of couples as they learn to navigate each other's different operating systems. And then as the gene keys, the things that they hate most and they want to change about their partner actually becomes the portal that is their deepest endearment, because they were attracted to somebody who is very, very different. And if you learn to, I don't know if you've ever, in Germany, if you have the three-legged man race, where you tie two legs together in the middle and you have to run. I don't know if you've seen that. Well, marriage is a lot like that. Relationships are a lot like that. Business partnerships are a lot like that. We get to be relational people. And so when you bring two people's energies together, two biocomputers create a whole new system. It creates a whole new map. So you have to learn to be in sync. And a lot of people, they're not willing to, some people we hold hands up the mountain for just a little while, and others like we really want to settle in with for decades. And so if you can learn each other's operating system, then the resistance goes away. There's a surrender that happens in an honoring, and then the couples begin to not just live, but to thrive. And then that next level would then be to co-create that imagination that comes to play. And so you're learning to run very quickly with your legs tied together and utilize each other's sacred talents and gifts. And if somebody drops into a shadow, you're not all over them and thinking they're like, you're an idiot, like, get over it, or I'm leaving. You're like, how can I support them in how they want to talk, how they want to communicate? Do they need their cave? And that's all, we're not going over that, but like, there's ways in your chart and in the gene keys to be able to look at it and go, that person needs a minute by themselves, or that person needs to just get what's off their chest out. And I'm not taking it personal. I'm just going to listen, and then we'll be able to talk. So like, it's just beautiful with my clients to be able to give them the tools to do this for themselves.
So I think the whole couples dynamics, relationship dynamics, I get. I wonder, are there one or two use cases where you could exemplify that for team dynamics, and then segue into like different styles of leadership?
That's a really great one. So what you do at home is what you do at work. There's no way to separate yourself in it. And we've been living in a society where we've been wearing a lot of hats. I have my spiritual hat on when I'm here, and I have my shaman hat when I'm with these people, or I have my leadership hat on here. And what we're seeing happen right now is that people are, with these tools and with new embodiment, people are able to show up as all of them. And that's what we all want. We want to be seen, and we want to be heard, and maybe felt or experienced, right? We want to be honored in who we are. When we give each other permission to do that, that changes how we show up in our work. And then our leadership is specifically niched at where your genius is, rather than trying to be something you're not in the workspace. So as we mentioned earlier, as you go through the Venus sequence, which is this second area in your gene keys, hologenetic profile, the Venus sequence works you systemically back through all of your core wounding up to the age of 21, from conception to 21. So we're going through this. How it ties into work relationships is, if you have gone through your core wounding, that last area of your conception core wounding happens to be in the same space as your vocation. So what I find happening in workspaces, if we go into corporations or we're talking to people about their work, people do what they're paid to do oftentimes, or what the family business was, or whatever the circumstances are. Maybe you got married and then you started having kids, and even though you were just doing a job, now you have a family to take care of, and so you gotta provide. So we find people in the workspace not actually playing the role that they were designed to do. So the best gift we can do in the workspace is to honor and ensure that people, because their innate genius is always going to be where we want people to show up. And so if I'm the CEO of a corporation or my small business, or I have business partners, we don't want a hierarchy. We want what's called a synarchy. And the synarchy is people coming together with their genius to create a whole. So depending on a project, depending on a work setting, what it is that we're trying to accomplish in this job setting or this project, we want people doing what they came here to do. And so gene keys can have a significant role on people using the energy they have in the area that they were designed to use it, in the genius that they were designed to. And there's trillions of ways that you can incorporate this into your gene keys. Just because you're a teacher doesn't mean you have to go to university and sit down with students, or teach kindergartners, or even be teacher online. There's a lot of different ways that you can show up as a teacher while being a shaman, while being a plumber, it doesn't matter. So whatever you're doing, we're going to help you understand what is the role that you were designed to do. And then if you have a team of people, we want to make sure that everybody is in the right role, and then that they're contributing in a way that moves energy forward, that moves the project forward, rather than what we hear is, I'm exhausted. I was working with a gentleman just recently that had a heart attack, and he's so stressed out and everything's built up. And, we sometimes don't listen to the body. Your body will tell you, well, your strategy and authority will tell you if you're out of alignment. And if you do that long enough, you're going to have something happen because the energy is getting backed up. So like that gentleman, if we can guide him into the right way he uses his energy in the work with the team, and everybody's honoring that, then that becomes a very synergistic place where resources, because then we move from vocation over to the culture, which is, who's your target market? Who are you here to impact? Are you here to impact the one? Are you the trend setter? There's 6 lines in the I Ching that we didn't really cover that, but just imagine that these filters, are you here to be the trend setter? That is the foundational principle. Are you someone who works one-on-one? Are you somebody who works in a small group, somebody who works in the larger community, somebody who's a global representative as a line 5, somebody who speaks to the masses and is really designed for leadership, or somebody who is a line 6, who's making sure that everyone's getting taken care of, and that from the micro to the macro, we're looking at all of the questions. We're asking the right things in the project. So it's just, I can't speak enough about that as far as in the workspace. And then you asked me to mention leadership. Some people are designed for leadership and others are not as geared for leadership. And there's certain, those people from elementary school, from kindergarten, those kids are those kids, right? And that doesn't mean that we can't all be leaders in our families, in our homes, in our own lives. But how we are a leader could be based off of those 6 lines. So like, Alistair, you're a line 6. What do you do for a living? As a line 6, can you see the correlation in your field? How you are what? I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful way to wrap up my podcast. What I find really interesting, and I think only really now in my mid-40s, coming at a deep peace within myself, is that I'm really interested from the micro to the macro. So I love working one-on-one. I adore working one-on-one, but I also advise on a founder of a think tank, and I'm a trained macroeconomist. But where for some people that might sound like utterly ridiculous, maybe even to the point of not being like honest about like the depth of my expertise, I can just say, well, I shared 25 plus years in meditation and 14 years in shamanism, and I hold a deep expertise in like macroeconomics. I don't have like a problem with that. And I can also say that I truly care about like changing through my purpose on a very micro level, like again, one-on-one coaching. What could be more micro, right? But again, I really strive to implement, roll out like big and bold projects that disrupt like whole industries. And coming to a point within my biography where I honor that feels actually very, I don't know, very alive, I think, ultimately. And I think from that point of aliveness, since we're all unique, that's at least how I perceive us as humans, but every, even hummingbird, every bumblebee, every whatever leaf on a tree, there will not be a second same leaf or a second same bumblebee. I think it's more that we'll learn how to navigate through the innate uniqueness we're giving. And again, for me, the Gene Keys is just one example of all these beautiful maps that are out there. And when people feel resonance, I would strongly recommend, okay, choose the map where you have most resonance, work with it for a certain amount of time, doesn't really matter, half a year, 2 years, 5 years, and then ultimately, obviously, discard the map, right? Because the map itself is again just an abstraction of the lived and felt experience in my whatever Alistair earth suit body, trying to come to grips with grand challenges on a human level, but also just really wanting to unlock my next level of entrepreneurship, fatherhood upcoming, rooting myself in Guatemala, la la la, I've never prepared for leaving Europe. So for me, that feels almost like my closing words. I would like to hand you over before your closing words. When people for the first time through that episode are meeting with the Gene Keys, where can they start their journey? And after telling them where they can start their journey, or where you maybe give some recommendations, then also just share some closing words.
Yeah. Well, Alistair, you have a lot of sixes in you, and sixes actually build up to have experiences, especially in that culture where you're aligned six. So you can do any of the roles. That's what makes you so fluid, is that six has experience with the all. So when I'm a 2 in that. I work one-on-one really, really well. I work with one-on-one corporations or one-on-one people. And so you said it exactly. And I think I shared that with you earlier. Like you've really done a lot of internal work. You didn't need Gene Keys or human design or any other system, but the framework was helpful until it wasn't necessary. And so as we work together with clients, ideally, it's not about me telling you what your Gene Keys are. You and I, when we are together, we explore. We do a lot of exploration. And so it's really not about me looking at a word or looking at something. It's really about you having access to this space that transcends, that space within you that is wise and that does know how to guide you, because your genetics are there to be the vehicle that you are a passenger to your whole life. And so if you learn the operating system, because your vehicle is always going to be driving, it's all so much, and your genes don't ask you when, your DNA doesn't ask you any questions. It just does its thing. It's like a manifester. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, that some people are very niched, whether it's in leadership, there's all these different roles, and it's just, you get to be whatever feels the best from a embodied state. Okay, so as far as how to get started with Gene Keys has Richard Rudd has created an amazing website filled with information, and there's a free hologenetic profile on there. So I would suggest that. And I know that in your comments, we're going to put a link there that will connect you with me. And so if you want to use that affiliate link, that's great. But if you just go to genekeys.com, you can go in and get your free profile. It gives you actually paragraphs around each of those 3 hologenetic profiles. It just gives you a little synopsis about your physical body, your emotions, and your mind. So gives you those 3 areas. A very cool thing. There's like a mini course for free on there. I've never seen anybody so generous with their information as Richard Rudd. His courses are very inexpensive. And so what I typically do with clients is walk them through their hologenetic profile while they purchase the course, because he gives you everything you need. There's also some books that we can give you some references to on Audible. Just The Gene Keys by Richard Rudd on Audible is a great one. And I can give you a few of my favorites. Anything Richard Rudd has written on human design or gene keys is my go-to. And there's a ton of videos on YouTube. There's all kinds of places, and you'll be guided to what you need. And yeah, that is where they can get started.
Okay, but since I already did my checkout after our encounter and sharing the podcast, closing words, something like a gift you want to share? Yeah, just because I feel like I'm already checked out. But
You're done. Okay.
After guiding the people, you know, what would be your checkout for the podcast?
I think in all, just like feeling what I wish that I could tell you as an individual listener is that you are so genetically beautiful. And the disease we have on this planet is self-hatred. And people don't like themselves because they don't know who they are. They have been conditioned to believe something and it just doesn't fit right. And so I just want to tell you that there is a place inside you that transcends what you've been told on the outside world and what you've been conditioned or what is popular. We don't need systems, but we do need a way to access this inner wisdom. And if you will be guided by your own intuition and through your being still, the art of contemplation is something we teach in Gene Keys. If you can learn to be still in the pause, you don't have to be a master meditator like Alistair is or a master shaman. You have to be still. I would suggest going out into nature and just listen, because there is a harmony in the world and in the galaxy and in the universe, and you are an intricate note in that harmony. And so is your note in tune or out of tune is how well the orchestra plays. So we have an individual role and a collective role that we play. And so there's only one eternal now. So take this moment to just really breathe into who am I and start asking those questions. And if you can be still long enough to listen, you will be guided, and please trust that. And even if you just get some basic information on human design, I can also put a link in there to Genetic Matrix where you can get a human design chart for free. And between those 2 charts, and you just start looking and you do your research, and we can give you some books to read that you can start understanding your operating system and live who you are rather than who you're not. So just know that we're all one organism in this big scheme of the universe. So we need each other, and each individual is as valuable as another. I have a nonprofit that I work with, and we're in the little corners of the regions of these rural communities. And the brilliance and the innovation and the genius is just as valid there as it is in any of the urban cities and across the world. So Alistair, thank you for letting me be on the show today. I know we just barely even touched the surface of any conversation. We could talk forever like we do. And yet maybe we've reached somebody out there who needed to hear that there is a way that they can find more clarity in who they are and why they're here, and how to feel better in their mind, their body, and their spirit.
Thanks so much for the conversation, Christine. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.